Welcome to Strip Coverlet. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for the fourth in a 5-part series as we journey through the Hungry Ghost Festival by Jen Campbell. This installment is the Rant in reaction to the collection. I will title this rant "The Quandary of the Perishing Poetica" for reasons that will become obvious later. I would like to say this first and foremost. I enjoyed this collection, and I enjoyed this collection more than I have ever enjoyed any of the collections that I have read by Mary Oliver. This is not an argument against Mary Oliver. This is an argument for Jen Campbell. Am I biased? Probably a little bit. I enjoyed Jen and everything that I've seen her do. I've enjoyed all of the writing that I have read from her. But it is also an observation of something which is increasingly sad on a literary scale, on a monumental scale in the literary community, I'm sorry. Never when reading Mary Oliver have I had an experience which was as fresh as reading Crosshatch was in this, nor have I read anything by Mary Oliver that made me grow as a writer, like Lobster Girl made me grow and think as a writer. And nothing that I've read from Mary Oliver made me grow as a reader and think as a reader in the way that Kitchen did in this collection. Excuse me. So here comes the angry part of this rant. When I very first got my license, I used to go to a mall in the area which was known as Antioch Mall, and there was a bookstore in this mall, and the entire back wall of this bookstore was poetry. And I would waste my evenings there reading poetry that I would not remember anyway. And one day I went into this bookstore and the poetry had been moved to 2 sections on the side wall of the store, which was as opposed to 3 sections, 2 sections, it was 33% smaller. By the time the summer before my senior year came around, there was simply 1 section of poetry, which still included a myriad of voices. It's where I bought my collection from Tupac, The Rose That Grew from Concrete, as well as one of my collections of Emily Dickinson. And I believe... I can't remember who the other poet was that I used to frequent on those shelves, but there were divergent voices present in that section still. By the time my senior year ended, there was no poetry to be found at that bookshop. And now the only chain bookstore in Kansas City is a Barnes & Noble for which there is 1 section of poetry, and the poetry shares that section with essays and critical essays. So poetry is shrinking in the public eye as far as you can buy it. I also happen to frequent many libraries. This is probably not a surprise. And in every library that I have gone to and perused the poetry section, Mary Oliver is there. And I cannot say this about any other poet, that they are present in every library that I have visited. Not Billy Collins, not Emily Dickinson, not Charles Bukowski, not even Shakespeare, insofar as a collection of his sonnets in the poetry section is concerned. Adding to this, poetry is, as far as I can tell, the most subjective form of writing or literature, at least as far as enjoyment is concerned. That is, if you hand a reader who is unprepared possibly for one of the great literary novels, and he or she reads it but still does not get it, normally they can say, look, I understand there was something bigger going on that I understood, but I didn't ever make the connection. If you hand an unprepared reader a great short story, he or she still feels the heft of what was lifted by that piece of literature. But think of The Red Wheelbarrow. The poem and the experience of it are pure brilliance, but in only 16 words. It is easy to understand that if you hand the red wheelbarrow to an unprepared reader, he or she might not understand the experience at all, and it will read more like a blank canvas than an artistic statement. This can be because the reader was unreceptive to it, was unconvinced by it, or was simply ignorant to the poet's toolbox, right? They are a different set of tools employed by the poet on a more regular basis than the tools employed by the novelist or by the short storyist. Place a struggling reader even before, for example, Shakespeare's Sonnet 18, and nothing might be gained. It's just some words that I don't really understand. They kind of sound pretty together, but there is nothing there for me. So the quandary of the perishing Poetica is one of irony. How poetic. Poetry requires more experience than other forms of literature in order to be enjoyed thoroughly. This level of experience is not something that the average reader carries with them from day to day. So people do not normally seek out poetry because they don't have the tools to read it, because they don't have the experience to gain those tools. Because no one checks the books out and no one buys them, libraries and bookstores do not carry diverse voices. They carry Mary Oliver. People who read and buy poetry have to read and buy something. So it ends up being Mary Oliver that readers check out and that readers buy. Therefore, the libraries and the bookstores are sure to carry Mary Oliver because Mary Oliver moves. Again, I am not using this as an argument against Mary Oliver. It's just the fact that she happens to be the one that you can find anywhere. You can find Mary Oliver's collections because they move, because that's all that's carried. It's a chicken or an egg situation. And it's unfortunate because of that. Poetry in the greater sense is shrinking. Poetry is becoming lesser known, lesser read. And I don't think anyone could make an argument convincing me that that is good for literature, that that is good for readership, that that is good for writers. If you like this sort of thing, make sure you hit like and subscribe. There will be a link in the description below, both to Jen's channel and where you can find the Hungry Ghost Festival. And I hope to see you for the final installment in this series, which will be 5 writing tips that you can find from the Hungry Ghost Festival by Jen Campbell.